tries to lick the desk. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anime Club After Dark, the podcast that delves into all things anime, manga, and otaku culture related. I'm your host, Alex, but you can call me Senpai, and joining me tonight, I have our poser extraordinaire, Natai.
Are you ready to talk about cat girls and perverts? Oh, no, just Monogatari. Never mind.
Listen, whether it's Monogatari or not, I am always ready to talk about cat girls. Just ask Finn.
Oh, boy. And her girlfriend.
Oh man, but yeah. So you and I have gotten together. We are continuing our foray into the Monogatari series, our Spoilercast series through Monogatari. And tonight, you and I are going to be talking about Nekomonogatari Black, which, besides Kizumonogatari, is the final part of Monogatari first season that we will be covering.
That's right.
And eventually we will be getting back to Kizu. As I've said before in a previous spoiler cast that we did, we've kind of decided to do the broadcast or release schedule for Monogatari, how we're going to go about doing these spoiler casts. But yeah, so before we get into second season, we got to talk about Neko Black. A couple of things.
This is an OVA that was released.
Yeah, it's an OVA series
episodes.
that was released. Yeah, and it's I won't say it's the shortest story arc in the Monogatari series, but it is the shortest part of the Monogatari series, technically.
Yeah.
Unless you count the movies as 3 episodes.
Tsuki Monogatari is also 4 episodes, if I remember correctly, actually.
Yeah, true.
But some of the episodes in Neko are quite long. Like the final episode is like 30 minutes.
Yeah, yes.
They kind of played with the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with an OVA series, it definitely gives you the freedom to do that. But a little bit of technical info before we actually get into the story here. Not a whole lot has changed. Still, it's Studio Shaft. We got chief direction for Akiyuki Shimbo. They brought on Tomoyuki Itamura for a lot of the episode direction. Character design still by Akio Watanabe. The music still composed by the GOAT himself, Satoru Kosaki. This is a 4-episode OVA series. All 4 episodes of this series were released on December 31st, 2012. What else is there? Oh, yes, the OP and the ED. So the OP is a song called Perfect Slumbers. It is sung by the voice actor for Tsubasa Hanakawa, Yui Horie.
Maybe one of my favorites OPs in the show. Yeah, maybe it's up there.
For both the OP and the ED for this part. The ED, by the way, is called Kiryu or Vanishing Daydream by Marina Kawano. For both the OP and the ED for Neko Black, I think they're both underrated. I think a lot of people tend to forget about them, but I like them both a lot. I specifically love I love the visuals of the OP. Perfect Slumbers.
I think it might have some foreshadowing for the next section of the story, which is interesting, but we'll get there when we get there.
It's also funny that in the OP you actually see Hanakawa carrying a guitar, and that's something that's with the music of this particular part. There's a lot of guitar pieces, specifically acoustic guitar. I think some people might be confused about that because it's never really shown or talked about in the anime adaptation, but in the light novel adaptation, it's mentioned a couple of times that Hanakawa can actually play the guitar.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. So this song could totally be like a song Hanakawa would be singing to herself or whatever.
Exactly.
Alone in a room. Oh, wait, she doesn't have a room. Never mind.
Well, we'll get to that. But no, I've always since I've read the light novels, I find that little detail in the OP to be kind of nice, even though it's never really talked about or shown or mentioned in the anime adaptation.
Also, like the final shot of the OP, like one before the final shot actually of Aragi kneeling before Hanakawa in the field of flowers. Now haven't checked what type of flowers it is. I'm sure it's like symbolic for like whatever, or maybe something, but it's just a really cool shot. Very melancholy. Very melancholic.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, so the let's get into the actual story of this. This is going to be pretty short compared to the rest of our spoiler cast, I think, maybe until we get to Tsuki Monogatari, which again is only 4 episodes. But the entirety of this part of the Monogatari series is comprised of a single story arc called Tsubasa Family. As the name would imply, Tsubasa Hanakawa is pretty much what this is about. And this is one of 2 parts of the Monogatari series that take place prior to the events of Bakemonogatari, the other one being Kizumonogatari.
Yeah.
So
now the events of this story arc we did talk about, and we saw a bit of it back in Bake, but that was very much the gist of it. So this is like an expansion on that part of the story.
Yeah, it's very much alluded to in the final story arc of Bakemonogatari, especially when you meet Black Hanakawa. You see some flashes from it, but aside from being talked about, you never really see a whole bunch from it. So this is actually the events that they talk about, when Black Hanakawa appears, for lack of a better word. These are the events that they're talking about. So this actually takes place during Golden Week, the events before Bakemonogatari. Yeah, Golden Week. This is also, I kind of wanted to point this out. This is the first story arc that we've covered thus far, in which absolutely 0 new characters are introduced.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the first Monogatari story arc where 0 new characters are introduced or even mentioned.
It comes back to somewhat of an issue that some people, myself included, might have with this section of the story, that it's kind of a rehash. We'll talk about this more as we continue this discussion, but just as you said, no new characters. This is an event that we know of. We just are getting more info about what happened exactly and motivations and stuff like that.
So episode 1 of this part starts out really, very Monogatari-esque, shall we say. A large chunk of this episode is dedicated to a conversation that Araragi is having with both his younger sister Tsukihi and his older little sister Karen, about what exactly constitutes being in love. Now, I want to say first and foremost, I love these 2 dialogues.
They're so good. Because it just shows so much information about the sisters and how Araki views them. Like, one very small detail I love is how when he asks both of them, they mention each of them has a boyfriend, and they mentioned that.
Yeah.
Now, a very small detail I didn't know of till recently is apparently the name of the boyfriends are like the same, just a mirror of each other. So it's very much implied that like Aragi is like willingly trying to not think of their boyfriend's existence or something like that because he's such a dumbass, which is great. I fucking love that detail.
Yeah, it is that's a great small detail. Yeah, that if you do pay attention, that the boyfriends' names are actually mirrors of each other, and it's like, boy,
it's great. But yeah. And just like we talked last time when Nisei, when Araki talked to Tsukihi, it seemed like she was very much conscious, very much intelligent. What's the word I'm looking for? Emotionally intelligent. So it's interesting to see that again when he talks to her about like, am I in love with someone or am I just like lusting after someone? And now, then we realize, oh no, he's just into Hanakawa's boobs, of course.
And then that scene, Jesus Christ, that's again, it's a lot like the toothbrush scene. It's like, why is this here? Where Tsukihi just puffs out her chest and say, here, touch him and see if you like him.
And he does.
He does. So that's what, like 4 times now that he's groped his sisters?
Pretty much. Not the last time, I'm sure.
Oh, it won't be the last time. I also love that later in this conversation, we have Karen come in and Koyomi asks her the same question, and she has a really great quote, and it's like, where he's asking her like, how can you actually tell if you're in love with someone and not just lusting after them? And the response that she gives very succinctly is, if you want to make babies with them, you are in love with them. It's that simple. Like, I know that sounds really funny to say out loud, but it's kind of true. Like, if you're with someone and
pragmatic
you look at them,
she is.
And you look at them and you're like, I want to have babies with you, you're probably in love with that person.
Just great characterization for both sisters, because again, like, Tsuki goes to an entire spiel of you just feel something, and like that feeling develops into something. Then Karen's like, oh, you just want to fuck him.
Yeah.
You want to make babies. It's
Yeah.
great. I love that piece of dialogue about both of them.
Yeah, and I also love how, like, the one with Tsukiki, it's very whimsical and very, I would say, very childish. It's a very childish, I say that almost condescendingly, but a very naive way to look at love.
Naive, yeah.
And whereas Karen, who is not that much older than Tsukiki, in fact, I think she's only like a year or so older than Tsukiki, just comes in and says very succinctly, you want to fuck him and impregnate him? You're in love.
It's great. It's really, really good. But yeah, and it goes back to that question we talked about back in the Bake episode, I think, about like how the show, it seemed like sort of is like the story as a whole position Hanekawa as like Aragi's love interest to some extent, but then this like whole arc that we're now discovering is pretty much why that doesn't happen, why he might have some feelings for her, but it is not love at all. And I like that this is what the story explores.
Yeah. So as he's leaving, and he's walking around, he actually meets Hanekawa, and he notices something about her, that she has a rather sizable bandage across her cheek, and he kind of
here we go.
Yeah, I know. He kind of puts two and two together after talking to her for a bit, and realizes that it's her family, specifically her father. Quote, I use that in air quotes. I know you can't see it, but her father hit her.
Yeah, I mean, later on we sort of we do see that, but her family situation is wild because her parents are not her biological parents. It's something along the lines of her father died and her mother committed suicide, so she was sort of like in between, like she's now like under the care of like this couple who were sort of married to each other and something, like I don't know what, but they're not her biological parents.
Yeah, to borrow a phrase, her family situation is not ideal.
Nope.
To say the least. I again, not to give her parents, again, big air quotes, parents, any benefit of the doubt. Like, there's still no reason to hit your child or the person you're looking after.
Obviously.
But
Obviously.
But something also that happens during this is Hanekawa makes Koyomi promise not to tell anyone about what's going on. And it gives you like a really good insight into Hanekawa. Like, she's definitely trying to put up this front that she's in a better situation than she's in. And I feel like there's a lot of victims of domestic abuse that do that.
Sort of trying to put that facade of everything is fine, everything is normal, like it's all okay.
Yeah, like a mask of normality.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly. And they even talk about it later in the arc, but that's very, very,
yeah. And I feel like it's one of the instances of the Monogatari series being very real, for lack of a better word. Like, I feel like you see this a lot in domestic abuse victims, and it's played very straight. Like, even when this conversation is happening, you don't get a whole lot of the Monogatari like craziness. Like, this conversation is played really straight. It's almost as if like the director Aki Kishimbo is like, all right, as much as I love doing all this crazy shit, this is a serious situation and you need to pay attention to it.
Yeah, like the show knows how to like take stuff, like treat stuff in like good taste, even when it's like really dark subject matter, like domestic abuse. Which
anyway,
is rough,
props to it for that, by the way, because just playing domestic abuse for what it is, a terrible thing.
For sure.
But anyway, so that's kind of how this episode ends. Like, they're kind of. I also love that, again, Monogatari going back to its craziness, where Araragi is in his head. He's like, because Hanekawa's like, I'll do anything you want if you just don't talk about it, and he's like, ooh, how can I exploit this? And like in his head, he's going through all these situations where it's like, ooh, I can just like I bend her over right now.
I can do all this type of crazy shit, but he won't do it.
Yeah. And like you can see that he's trying to get himself to do it, but deep down he knows he won't do it.
So then he just heals her wound on her cheek, which is
nice. He just heals the wound on his cheek. And I like how he describes it. Originally he was gonna take the bandage off and just lick her face. And he's like, and then afterwards he's like, no, I was too much of a pussy to do that.
And then we have a nice conversation between Araragi and Oshino, Meme.
Yeah.
Oh wait, but before that, actually, there's something else.
Yes, we get to see the beginning of Shinobu's obsession with donuts in episode 2.
No, she is still silent. She's not talking to Araragi after whatever happened back in Kizu. But the moment she sees the donuts, she's like, I'm gonna grab some of those.
And it's funny that, when I originally watched this, obviously I hadn't seen Kizu yet. In fact, when I originally watched this, Kizu wasn't even out yet. And it's interesting going back and seeing this scene after having seen the events of Kizu Monogatari and knowing why Shinobu is so quiet about this. When I first watched this, I couldn't really fathom why. The characters talk about her being quiet about the events that happened before, but it's like I kept wondering, like, what happened, what must have been so bad that keeps her from talking, because obviously she goes on to talk a lot in later parts, but it got me really interested to know more about these events that were eventually detailed in Kizu Monogatari, and it's interesting going back now and seeing these events after having seen Kizu.
Yeah, for sure, it's very, very interesting to piece that together.
I also love that scene where she just grabs the donut box and just inhales the donuts.
It's like fucking Kirby.
Exactly like Kirby. Oh, and also the damn Powerpuff Girls reference where Koyomi throws her off her and she hits the thing and it just literally turns into Powerpuff Girls art style.
Oh, I didn't realize that's the reference.
Yeah. Again, Monogatari has many references, not only to things that are Japanese, but things that are Western too. So after the whole thing with Shinobu and the donuts, he goes to Meme, and he does keep his promise, to his credit. He doesn't actually talk about Hanekawa, but he talks about the fact that while they were out and about and they were having this conversation, Hanekawa found a dead white cat and buried it. Now, for anyone who's seen Bakemonogatari before this, a white cat might sound very familiar.
Yeah, and then he goes into this whole spiel of like, wait a minute, that's not right. It's like that's a bit worrying.
I love the third degree that that Oshino gives him when he mentions the dead white cat too. He's like gives into 20 questions mode, like, where was it? What did it do? What was it? What did it look like? Were his eyes open? But then, Meme asks Araragi to go check on Hanekawa because he suspects that he knows what might be happening now. And that is when we first meet we don't first meet him, but it's when Araragi first meets the Sawari cat, who would eventually become Black Hanekawa.
I like how it's portrayed, how she attacks, because when he arrives, he meets her and he sees like these bodies laying around. And then she reveals, it's her parents that she attacked. And I like how it's portrayed as like these like sort of very like just black things that are around her, very, I don't know how to describe this type of color they use to depict them, but it's wild.
Yeah, it's almost like I equate the color palette in that scene to very much an Art Deco style, even though it's not an Art Deco like art style.
Sort of watercolor,
color palette
right?
is very Art Deco.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and I love the fact that in this in this scene where you actually see her parents getting attacked, it's like she just tosses the parents around like, yeah, fuck this. fuck this baggage. I don't care what you do with them.
And then just
also,
usual
just
tradition, she just fucks him up.
Yeah, props to the voice actor Yui Horie too for going back and forth between Hanakawa and Black Hanakawa too, just so seamlessly.
Yeah, it's like a switch. It's insane how she goes back between the two voices. Even later on in the arc, how she goes back and forth between the two voices, and you immediately notice like which one is who.
Yeah, for sure. And then in this fight, more or less, that occurs after Koyomi confronts Black Hanakawa. It's also worth noting that they don't actually call her Black Hanakawa until the end of this arc. It's just that we know as viewers that this oddity is called Black Hanakawa. But Koyomi himself gets really, really badly hurt and passes out. Doesn't die because he's still got his vampire powers. But he wakes up at the cram school, and Shinobu's been taking care of him all through the night.
Which again, we still don't know what happened before that would lead to this type of weird relationship between the two. But it's just heavily implied that something was off.
It's also
I love how at first he's like, oh yeah, she's just like using me to try and keep herself alive, and Oshino's like, no.
Like, nah, there's more there. But like, until it's actually explained later, it's heavily implied just by how they react to each other that they don't particularly like each other, but they realize they need each other.
Yeah.
And that's how their relationship kind of plays out. I feel like as the series goes on, they develop this great affinity for each other because of how like symbiotic their relationship is. But it's really interesting watching that develop, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as the Monogatari series goes on. But there's also this great dialogue that happens between both Koyomi and Meme Oshino about, the nature of the Sawari cat and what it can do and how dangerous it is.
I love that animation part where it's like this scroll opening up. It's just showing that old like story of the spirit and how it's portrayed with that very like classical Japanese artwork. It looks amazing.
Yeah, it's like very like 15th century Japanese artwork, but it looks great.
It looks so good.
And the one thing that comes from this conversation that Meme and Koyomi have is that Meme is like, listen, you probably shouldn't do this. You should probably leave this to me. I'm better at handling oddities than you are. You might be immortal, but
like
I have experience,
like,
man.
Oh, okay. It's interesting how, I don't know if easily, but it's sort of like, okay, I guess I'll just leave it be.
Yeah. I mean,
it's interesting.
He just got his ass handed to him, which happens a lot to Koyomi, let's be honest. But I don't know. It's the first time that Meme's like, no, hold on. I got this. I
think this is the only time he sort of has that sort of moment.
It's one of the few. Yeah. It may actually be the only time. I don't remember off the top of my head. But I think it is definitely one of, if not the only time, he actually takes things into his own hands and is like, I'll take care of this. Because every other time he's telling Koyomi, like, this is what you do. This is how you can go do it. This is like the 3 different ways you can maybe go about it. And then he leaves it to Koyomi. Because
he even mentions how he's like always trying to like remain a neutral, like sort of part of any situation they're in. And now it's the first time he's like, no, I'll take care of it. You leave it be.
I also like what it may be being subtly implied there that for Meme, if he gets too emotionally involved in what he's doing, it could actually be dangerous for him. I don't know. I've always felt that was a subtle implication in him saying something like that. Like, I probably shouldn't get too involved because it could be dangerous for me and the people involved in it.
I'll give the show credit for that. They managed to give him so much character while not revealing almost anything about him throughout the entirety of the series, which is really, really cool.
He has you still, by the last time he actually shows up, you know very little about him. but you still feel like he got a fucking development, and that props that's just clearly Nisio Isen's writing on display.
Yeah.
But anyway, on to episode 3. So episode 3, Koyomi is like, nah, I got to do something. I can't just sit here and sulk.
So he goes back to school.
Yeah. Well, one thing he does is he goes to check on Hanakawa's home, and he realizes that. I also love this. So he sneaks in through a window in the house, right? And the first thing he does, being a great Japanese boy, is he takes off his shoes when he's sneaking into someone's house. Because that's what you do when you're committing a crime. You be polite. And then he kind of walks around the house for a little bit. Of course, no one's there, but he realizes that Hanakawa doesn't have a room. Like, she literally just sleeps in the hallway.
I love how it's like a very shocking revelation for me. It's like, wait, what the fuck?
I feel like this is a shocking revelation to him in particular because he has always been used to having parents who love and care for him. And, like, he can't fathom having a home life where your parents don't care at all about you, where they literally treat you like shit all the time. And they couldn't even be bothered to care about your existence. I feel like, I hate using this word, but I feel like maybe for him, it's like him showing his privilege.
Anyway.
I hate using that phrase, I know. But, I mean...
Okay, go ahead.
It's like, that's how I kind of interpret it. Like, it's just, he can't fathom this because he... Number one, he's never personally experienced it, and he just can't understand why any parent would treat their child like that.
I mean, let's be honest. This is a very, very foreign concept to a lot of people. The fact that you don't even have like a room is like your own personal space for you and only you, right? And the fact that she doesn't have even that, the minimum of her own room, it's like kind of, okay, what the fuck's going on in this family? What's wrong with them?
Yeah.
So
I mean, hell, even in the scummiest families, they typically give their children at least a room with a bed.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I also love in this episode we get Tsukihi with the fire sisters. So he does find out
not a really good moment for both of them.
Yeah, he goes back home, Araragi does, and he finds out from Sugihi that there is a fucking giant cat person that's going around town and attacking people. And they're like, all right, the fire sisters have to go investigate this. And I love that it takes very little convincing or prodding or charming or anything. Koyomi's like, why don't you sleep with me tonight in my bed? And they're like,
and
all right,
of course,
we'll
immediately it cuts to all three of them together.
Yeah, it immediately cuts to all three of them in bed, just sleeping
just
together.
Just a family of perverts, dude. It runs in the family.
Literally.
I love that cutaway that in the morning you see both of them in bed, and instead of him, it's like just a piece of wood in between them. So stupid. But anyway.
And then when Koyomi actually goes back to the cram school, he finds out that Oshino got his ass handed to him in the middle of the night. It's the first, and I do believe only time during the Monogatari series where you actually see Oshino get hurt.
Mm-hmm. It's the only time we saw him sort of like put up, like actually, what should you call it? Like actually being put up a fight. Right.
Yeah.
Like so far, we've only seen it like the absolute like be able to do anything, solve any problem. But now it's like, no, I can't do this one.
And as a viewer, you look at that and think, oh shit, because this means that cat is a very powerful oddity. Because all the other oddities that he's been confronted with so far are ones that he either told Koyomi an easy way to handle it, or he handled it himself. Mm-hmm. And very easily too. Literally, sometimes it's just putting his hand on someone is like, all right, that's it. You're good. Bye. But he actually gets fucked up. And that raises the stakes because you, as a viewer, and Koyomi realizes that this is some serious shit.
At the same, yes, I agree. But at the same time, it goes back to the issue that is like, it's an issue that this arc has, no matter how you look at it, is that we already know the end of the story. We don't know like the emotional like end of like for the characters, like where they are at emotionally by the end, but we know how the story ends. So it kind of that's the main issue with this section, is that we know the ending already because we got sort of like a brief overview of it back in Monogatari, right?
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and I feel like, I think the stakes would have even been higher as someone who was watching it if this had actually been shown prior to Bakemonogatari.
Yeah, it's weird because I don't know how they would go about doing it, like, because it makes more sense to view this part at this section of the entire series because it leads up to the next arc we will talk about in the future, because it gives more context. But it's like, it's just a problem that this arc you just can't get out of this situation, right?
I have heard a couple of people describe Neko Black in this way, and the more I think about it, the more I think that they may be right. There's a lot of, well, I won't say a lot, I've heard like 2 or 3 people describe Neko Black as the Halo Reach of the Monogatari series, where its biggest issue is you already know what happens going into it.
As much as I love it, and again, it just gives more context and it explains like the emotional stakes. That's like, especially like Aragi's relationship with Hanekawa, and that's all great and good, but the main issue is that we know how it ends. It sort of kind of, it just lessens the impact, and sort of like, you're watching, it's like, oh, but I already know how it ends, so it's like, what's the point? It's kind of an issue.
Yeah. But I definitely think I 100%.
But I do like it. Don't get me wrong. I do really like
the one
it.
thing I love about it in particular is how much context it gives to things that have come before and that will come after. Particularly with the very next storyline leading into second season, which is going to be Nekomonogatari White, which we'll talk about next time.
It's going to be so good.
But getting back to this, so Koyomi actually goes back to school. I also love the fact that he goes to Hanekawa's desk, puts his head on her desk and says, "Her boobs sit here." And he tries to lick the desk, and then the Sawari cat just appears right in front of him.
It's so stupid.
I love that conversation that they have, though, and then you find out why she's doing it. Of course, again, it's been alluded to previously in the final story arc of Bakemonogatari, but it's because the cat is there to relieve her stress, which Hanekawa has built up over time, which you would imagine she would, living with abusive parents.
Yep.
And that she's going to keep on doing what she's doing, which is going out and attacking people in the middle of the night until Hanekawa is no longer stressed. And it's...
Which will take a lot.
Yeah, which is going to take a lot. And then I love the stinging revelation that Koyomi gives her, and he's like, and then the cat's like, then the master will be good. And then Koyomi's like, really? Because at the end of the day, that stress is eventually going to come back, because where is she going to end up? In the same place she got stressed.
Yeah, it's not really solving a problem at all. It'll come back.
It's a temporary solution to a permanent problem.
Which, as we know, because we know what it comes after, like the problem does come again and again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. And so, like, Koyomi is basically telling her, you got to cut off the point of the stress if you're going to actually get rid of the stress. Yeah, attacking all of these people might feel good, and it might get rid of the stress temporarily, but eventually when she goes back to that home, when she goes back to those parents, what's going to happen? The exact same thing again, which we see the culmination of it in the final arc of Bakemonogatari.
Mm-hmm.
So Koyomi was right, and the cat's like, well, fuck you, and I'm going to go do it anyway. Because it's like, it's that whole thing. It's like, it's my nature. It's what I do.
Yeah.
I can't not do it.
Yeah.
And that's actually, that's a big part of what this whole part is kind of about. It's like, fighting your instincts or fighting your nature. Because, Hanekawa is having to do that because she's having to find a way to deal with stress. Koyomi is having to fight his nature of trying to, hook up with Hanekawa.
That's actually interesting. I haven't thought about that, but I do agree. It goes for both of them in this arc. Yeah.
And then we get to episode 4, the final episode of this part. Shinobu becomes a fucking badass slowly.
But that comes later. What do you think about, because like we talked about how, like, sorry to cut you off, but we talked about how, like, so they talk about the domestic abuse, it's very heavy, but then Oshino is like talking about, well, I kind of understand where they come from, and Araki is like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, she's putting up this facade of like being right, being this like just normal and righteous person, and it will rub you the wrong way when you see that on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, I definitely 100% understand that. I feel like
I don't know if I agree with that though. That seems very,
I'm not saying
very
I agree
harsh.
with it. I'm saying I understand it though, because I feel like if you were around someone day in and day out that was always like righteous, and especially if they were self-righteous, if they were constantly trying to one up you with their intelligence, even if it was not intentional. I can understand how that would be very frustrating to be around that person, especially if it's someone that you aren't like
actually related to.
Yeah, because if
it's already alienated from them.
If it's someone in your family, you just kind of grin and bear it because like it's family, right? You just deal with it. But if it's someone who you're not even related to, or even if you are related to them very distantly, you just like shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
No, and it's not right, quote unquote. It's not the correct way to handle it the way that her parents are doing it. But I can understand the frustration that would be, having someone in your house that's constantly like that. It's constantly trying to show you up.
Yeah, I get it. But it is interesting. Like that they do bring up this like angle of the story, right? But anyway, then Araki gets a big ass sword.
Well, and then Koyomi just like being like, "You might be right, but I don't care. It's still wrong." But yeah, that sword though, that sword's pretty cool.
It's big.
It's very big. But no.
But then
I also
we
love
cut
the
to the
plan. I love the plan that Araki comes up with for all this too. So I mean, you kind of find out after the fact during the fight, but so his plan is he's gonna actually swallow the sword, right? And it's gonna be inside his body. And of course, he's a vampire, so his body should theoretically be able to take it.
Right.
And he's gonna actually lure Black Hanakawa into attacking him basically.
He pretty much antagonizes her to just kill him.
Yeah, and so he actually texts Hanakawa saying that help, I'm being attacked, please.
I love how they show that, how with the timer like going on, and how like 30 minutes later, boom, she just busts through the wall and attacks him. It's
I know, right?
What's wrong?
I also love that clearly I think he was expecting to at least get out of the cram school and fight in the open, and he's kind of surprised when she busts through the wall.
I thought he was like intentionally luring her into the cram school, just to a different part of it.
I feel like he was trying to get at least outside of the cram school. I don't think he actually expected to be fighting inside the school.
Gotcha.
Because like he actually looked shocked when she busted through the wall. It's like, bitch, I was trying to get outside.
It's so good though how they present it. Now it's like it looks great.
I also really like just how much Koyomi is goading her into attacking him, and it's like
he's trying really hard. Like by the end of it, it's like, no, I actually hate you.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah, and just all the vileness that he's spitting at her, and you can see that she's getting madder and madder because the hair just keeps standing up higher and higher.
Also, they sort of like show how the lines are blurred between her and Black Hanakawa. Like sometimes it's her, sometimes it's not her. It's cool because you hear it in her voice, but they also show it with her eyelids, right?
Yes.
It's really cool.
So anyway, she actually finally does attack him, and then Koyomi's plan just kind of goes as expected. He's essentially eviscerated. He's cut in half. So she's hit by the sword. Koyomi's just fucked up against a wall, bleeding out.
In very graphic.
It's very graphic. Yes, blood everywhere. It's very reminiscent of how he finds Shinobu in Kizu, actually. the way that the blood is just kind of around him.
That's right. Actually, that's right. Didn't think about it.
And then, like, as he's kind of just up against the wall bleeding out, and he's looking at the cat, like, writhing in pain in front of him, Koyomi just, like, he feels like content. He feels like he's dying, but he seems to be very content in that his last act was that he saved Hanakawa. But he doesn't. It doesn't seem to think that the cat is going to try and take over completely, which is what she tries to do. She's trying to take over Hanakawa's body entirely. Like, there will be no Hanakawa afterwards. It'll just be Black Hanakawa.
She's technically white, but yeah.
Yeah. But then Shinobu arrives and becomes the badass lily we need her to be.
And then she pretty much just solves everything. And it's all just done until Bake, but yeah.
Yeah. So Shinobu just comes in. I know a lot of people will claim that was like a Deus Ex Machina, but I think the whole point was
I think it's definitely, like, we know, like, she's there. It totally makes sense that she would do it. Like, she saved him earlier this arc. I don't know why people think it's, like, sort of like a Deus Ex Machina.
I thought the whole point was of Koyomi's plan was, even if he couldn't outright kill her with the sword, the idea was to break Black Hanakawa down and then have Shinobu deal the finishing blow. That was what I always thought the plan was. It's just it wasn't entirely revealed.
You think so?
To the audience.
Because he looked surprised when she arrives.
I don't know. Either way, I don't feel like it's a Deus Ex Machina, even though some people do claim it is. Yeah. Whether it was always planned to end that way, or if Shinobu realized what was going on, it's like, all right, I'll finish this off. But anyway, the whole aftermath of this is since Shinobu essentially bit Hanakawa and sucked all of it out, the Black Neko out.
She doesn't remember anything.
She doesn't remember a damn thing, and that's probably for the best. Koyomi also has this realization that, no, I was never really in love with her. I was just in lust.
But can you blame him?
I mean, look at her tits, man. I love...
I mean, I won't deny.
I mean, she looks good in fucking pajamas. Just saying.
But then the final cherry on top is actually seeing Hitagi at the end, and he directly connects to Bake, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, so the final scene of this, when everything is wrapped up, as the credits are rolling, like, the actual final shot you see is Hitagi standing at the top of the stairs, which is the beginning of Bakemonogatari. Like, what a great sense of continuity. Like, that's how you know this is what leads into that. Also shows you why Koyomi was late that day of school.
Ah, that's right. I didn't think about that. Actually, yeah.
The reason he was running and, like, trying to get to school as fast as he could and was running up those stairs was because he was late.
Huh.
Because of what happened the night before.
I didn't even think about it until now. That's cool.
Yeah,
as we get deeper and deeper into the show, like, the whole time will be weirder and weirder, but it's still, like, I'll give them credit. Like, it does connect at the end, which is really, really cool.
Yeah. And so that is the story of Nekomonogatari Black. So what are your final thoughts about Neko Black, Natai?
It's great. It's really, really good. I like, the more I talk about it and think about it, I do appreciate more, like, the themes it delves into, and, like, just fleshing out more the characters we know so far.
Yeah.
It just, as we talked about earlier, it has that issue of, okay, we know the overarching story of this whole arc. We know, like, the beats sort of somewhat. And so it just holds it back from being one of my favorite parts of the show, because every time I go back to it, I'm like, oh, okay, it's fine. But no, it is really, really good. It just has this one issue that I just can't escape from it. But aside from that, like, I love the interactions. I love, like, the whole theme of and the relationship between Araki and Hanakawa. It's really, really good. And yeah, it's great. It's just not one of my favorites.
Yeah, I agree with just about everything you said. It's certainly not one of my favorite parts of the Monogatari series. However, I definitely feel like this is an overlooked part of the Monogatari series. I think a lot of people just kind of dismiss this as like, it's just context, it's just filler, more or less. And it showed us things that would have been way easier and shorter to just tell us about, or some of this stuff could have been done as flashbacks during Bakemonogatari. And yeah, it could have been done that way. But no, I still appreciate this for what it does. And it gives a lot of context, as we mentioned, to what comes next in Nekomonogatari White, which is the very first part of second season.
Which is great because that one is one of my favorite arcs. So I'm really excited to get into that next time.
It's definitely one of my favorite arcs too. I feel like without Neko Black, I think going into Neko White, I feel like you would have lost something. It would have lost.
Yeah, it is essential. You need to watch it. Like it's made for a reason. Like it exists for a reason. I
definitely feel like if you didn't have one, then Neko White wouldn't have been quite as impactful as it is. But we'll definitely be talking about that next time. But yeah, that's Nekomonogatari Black, everyone.
I love how we thought it's gonna be a shorter episode, but it was like 10 minutes shorter or something like that.
I know, like it's 4 episodes, but we spent 45 minutes talking about 4 episodes. This is what the Monogatari series. This is why you and I did this, because we love talking about the Monogatari series. And I look forward. My absolute favorite part of the Monogatari series is coming up in second season. It's going to be so good. There are some really good story arcs in second season, and I cannot wait to talk about them. And of course, we will be coming back to Kizumonogatari eventually. But like I said in the beginning, we are doing a broadcast version of this the sequence that we're doing. So,
but for next time, we're gonna be doing the first half of second season, right?
Well, I was thinking about that. We might want to separate second season into 3 parts instead of 2.
We'll figure it out.
Seeing as we just spent 45 minutes talking about 4 episodes, I'm just saying.
We'll figure it out. It'll be fine.
Yes. But yeah, that is Nekomonogatari Black. Thank you all out there for dropping in to listen to us. Check the description below to find links to Anime Club After Dark on Twitch, on social media, and on Discord. Check out our merch store and our affiliate links as well. Any purchases you make there do really help us out. With that, I have been your host, Alex, and I will see you next time. Say goodnight, Natai.
Bye.
Yeah.
No, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that.